One of the key things that you can do to get the attention of the executive team as a chief security officer is really taking the opportunity to educate them. There's also another opportunity typically to have a non-government forum, maybe on a quarterly basis, where you get in an advisor, an external advisor, who may be an expert in cybercrime or even an authority in cybersecurity. That's the first thing to do. Secondly, it's all about making sure that they understand the actual risk that they're holding today and how long do they want to maintain that risk. One of the great ways to engage senior leaders in that narrative that chief security officers can do is benchmarking. Everybody wants to know, especially if you're a commercial enterprise, you don't want to be spending too much on cybersecurity and you don't want to be spending on too little. You want to be hitting that kind of Goldilocks zone. Benchmarking against peer organizations is a really good way to position yourself. The next thing would be to look at frameworks, industry frameworks. How do you compare on a maturity level? That would be a really good level set, again, against industry benchmark frameworks for cybersecurity. NIST is a really good way to do that. And then there's something else that I think is crucially important. You need to be having a conversation about which assets are of most value. If you have a conversation with a business leader and you ask the question, what assets or products or services do they value most? They're typically going to tell you something about, this makes me more money, this opens this new market. Once they've told you those products and services that are important to them, you then take that away, have a look at those products and services, and begin to understand the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those products and services that are being used out there. When you next go in there for a conversation, and they understand that the most important product that they think is making money is now vulnerable and less likely to be available or even attacked, they'll think twice about that investment and support your agenda because you've turned it into a business advantage. So when it comes to having conversations with the board, what can a chief security officer focus on? I think it's important that you don't want to bamboozle the senior executives with language that they just don't understand. Remember, they're more focused on business than they are on cybersecurity. So it's crucial that you take the time to make them understand certainly the impact, but introduce some of this language that they'll understand. So try to relate it back to what they might understand. Now, everybody understands that they'll all have assets of value. And we want to be focused on the most important assets that we need to protect, which are the crown jewels. So when it comes to having a conversation with a senior leader, I typically use this simple framework, and it's based on NIST. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Why is that a really easy framework? Well, the first thing is you're going to say, what is important to you? What are your crown jewels? What are the threats? And what are the things that are you most concerned about? Just running a calculation around this and looking at things like the crown jewels, the threats, you can then start to look at the controls. This is the protection. So which controls are you going to place over your crown jewels to mitigate those threats? That's the risk equation. In the middle, you've got a breach. So not all of those protection controls are going to be sufficient. So then you're getting into the realm of cyber resilience. So this is all about how can you detect, respond, recover at pace. Just having that conversation is a really easy way for them to engage in the narrative. You can then come back again and you can then replay these 5 areas associated with metrics so they can see if you're getting better or worse on all the things that you talked about. So for example, do you have all your crown jewels understood in the organization? Are they protected by a small number of essential non-negotiable controls? And if you're in Australia, you've got the essential 8. And then it can be all about pace. You kind of mean time to detect, mean time to respond, mean time to recover, those sorts of metrics. It's a really good way to involve them in the narrative. And you just need to think about it in business terms. When it comes to measuring the effectiveness of the risk reduction initiatives that you're putting in place, you're going to need to think of a few additional layers that's going to be able to indicate whether you're moving in the right direction or not. The first thing is you're going to be building out a strategy. The strategy has to have a clear intent about what stages of risk it's going to hit and by when, and what level of investment is required to get you to that goal that you've all agreed. And typically that goal that you've agreed is the risk appetite. When are you going to get within risk appetite? Board members, executives, and regulators are super interested in this So you need to make sure up front you defined what your goal is. It's important to define what your goal is because as you implement more and more security initiatives, you're going to find more things. And therefore, the goalpost is always going to be moving. You want to be able to answer the question, why are we seeing more incidents? It's because you've implemented stuff and now you can see all the bad stuff happening. So you need to prepare yourself for those sorts of questions. Metrics matter. Benchmarking will always be something that will need to be done. Benchmarking against peers, benchmarking against maturity frameworks. This gives you a really good level set if we're heading in the right direction. And more longer term, are we able to test that those controls are effective and enduring? And we're going to find the gaps or opportunities to increase our pace at which we detect the attackers. So if you are a chief security officer, make sure you understand your responsibilities. You're there extensively to advise the senior leaders on the risk, and they make the decisions about what risk appetite is acceptable, and you implement what is required. It's as simple as that. Whilst boards are responsible and largely accountable for setting the culture tone at the top, it's the executive team who are responsible for actually making sure it gets implemented. The Chief Security Officer and his broader team, or her broader team, are there to ensure that the appropriate measures are deployed and are adequate. But crucially, the executive team are making sure that the culture is implemented across the organization. The key way that this can be done is embedding cybersecurity in their messaging out to the broader organization. Well, this really means that whenever a CEO stands up to do his quarterly announcement, to talk about the shares doing well, or to talk about new initiatives, we want to be finding opportunities to embed cybersecurity messaging into that narrative. This way, it doesn't become something that's bolted on, it's seen as built in, which plays to a very key principle of cybersecurity, which is secure by design. So the big opportunity for business leaders and executives to get involved in the cybersecurity risk reduction agenda is to support your senior leader who's responsible for delivering that risk reduction. So senior executives have an obligation to protect the enterprise by engaging with the cybersecurity team and other risk teams associated with delivering risk reduction. This means embedding it in their own team meeting messages. So for example, if you're a business leader and you know that data security of your clients is important, that doesn't just stop at your leadership team. Your leadership team needs to take that all the way down the different levels. If you think about a technology team or a developers team, those developers are usually the people who are responsible for deploying security controls and designing them in as those products and applications are being built. If we're not applying secure by design principles, the afterwork costs more money and leaves us open to many more attacks. So there's a few initiatives that you can put in place as a priority to really shift the needle on the culture and the positive behavior change that you're looking for in your organization. The first thing is a major cyber crisis simulation. Not only is it a great opportunity for everybody to understand their roles and responsibilities when something bad happens, but it's also a great opportunity for them to understand and learn more about what can happen in the event of a major cyber crisis. In some small organizations, this can simply mean going out of business because there is no options. Larger organizations might have cyber insurance and therefore they can pay out for the ransom and get their decryption keys back. But even that's not an option or becoming less of an option because of heavy regulations. It's also a really good way to unlock funds. So I didn't run a major cyber crisis until about 8 months into my tenure. And as I was walking out of that meeting or that session, the CEO tapped me on the shoulder and went, "Darren, fantastic. That's been a great opportunity and insight for me. I just wish you'd have done that sooner. You'd have got double the investment for cybersecurity." Some other things you can do is profile the risk of your enterprise. Critically, there is a small number of people in your organization who are seen as risky individuals compared to others. This could be somebody who has privileged access to crown jewels, has failed their phishing test, and by the way, has done poorly on their education. That would be a red flag for an individual that needs some kind of intervention and something more broadly that you could think about. Another way that you can think about this is introducing a cybersecurity ambassador program. It's a great way to engage a much broader audience and get your reach into different areas of perhaps a global company that you might be running. Cybersecurity ambassadors will need some encouragement, and they'll certainly need some incentive to be able to do the right thing. But it's a great opportunity. Phishing. Simulated spear phishing is a pretty good way to engage a broader audience and a broader narrative with your executive. And the final thing I'll talk about is just general culture embedding of stories and narratives. If you can run regular videos or some kind of reach out from the CEO to the broader organization in messages that they're delivering, that's going to have a profound impact on the culture. Really what we're looking for is everybody to be thinking like a chief security officer. Are they thinking about it as second nature in the jobs that they do today? Are they considering the opportunity to embed security in the future? And I'll give you a really good example. People doing the right thing will report suspicious behavior. This is a really good way to understand and track if your culture is heading in the right direction. There's lots of metrics that you can use to understand whether your behavior or culture is moving in the right direction. So it's super important you understand what those metrics are up front and measure consistently over time. Cybersecurity is not the responsibility of purely the cybersecurity team or the technology team. It's everyone's responsibility. An IT issue is certainly important. When you think about cybersecurity, it's largely enabled through technology. So technology is still an important factor. However, the human factor in terms of it's a business risk is crucially important. And this is a business challenge that we often need to overcome with executives, business leaders, and even people you might meet in a barbecue. How many times have you gone to a barbecue, you're talking you work in cybersecurity and they tell you their computer is broken. So anyway, this is one of the things that we need to get over. Why is this important? Well, look, there's a huge regulatory factor if you happen to be in an industry that's regulated, such as the financial services or even government. Big incentives to make sure that you get it right. The other thing that is crucially important, if you don't get it right, of course, is that you leave yourself open to a major cyber crisis. And that is just not costly in terms of cleaning up. It can have a significant effect in terms of shareholder value. And if you're a small business, about on average, 60% of small businesses actually go out of business as a result of a major cyber crisis. So lots of good reasons to get this right. The board's role in cybersecurity, for me, is pretty clear. They have a significant oversight role. They certainly are responsible for setting the tone on culture. And in the regulated industries that I've worked in, culture comes right at the top of the agenda. But why culture? Well, culture is one of those things that means that all the cybersecurity investments that you've put in place, if culture is done properly and behaviors change, it becomes sustainable. If you're going to invest a lot of money up front, you want to make sure that it sticks, otherwise you'll have to reinvest again. In terms of other responsibilities of the board, you can look at making sure that roles and responsibilities and accountabilities are clear. So they play a key role in each of those committees, making sure that those roles and responsibilities are clearly understood between the executive team and the board. Culture is not like implementing a technical solution and seeing results overnight. It's going to take time to change people's behaviors and even mindsets. But the way to start that is at the very top. You need to engage the board because typically they're involved in the culture for the organization, but you also be including the business leaders and the entire C-suite. If you can get the CEO on board in particular, I think it's a great way to involve them directly. We also need to be considering board risk appetite metrics. This is the way that the board and the executive team will understand if we're operating within appetite or the thresholds have been broken. There's also other regulatory requirements that boards are obviously accountable for. And if you look at some of the new SEC rules that are coming out, they've got responsibilities to report on incidents. So those are some of the regulations that boards are super concerned about. There's another important aspect as well. When a major cyber crisis happens, the boards are typically involved in some of that decision-making process. That will be, we've had a ransomware attack, we've had a breach of our data, and the attackers are asking for an encryption key to be paid for, which is a ransom to be paid. In those circumstances, boards are typically brought into those discussions to make the final decision on whether we pay or don't pay. Those sorts of decisions need to be made up front. So an investment in the brand, an investment in cybersecurity to prevent a major cyber crisis is always going to be the best course of action. For me, it starts at the top. It's not a one-time investment of your effort. It needs to be a consistent thing that happens in every committee, or even on a quarterly basis in a non-government forum. The first thing is you'd be looking for a business-led, high-value cybersecurity strategy. That cybersecurity strategy needs to deliver big value ticket items and some quick wins. It needs to be easily understood by the board. So they need to understand the investments that they're putting in are going to bring about some serious risk reduction and meet some of those metrics. That's a crucial element. And then the longer term investment will be, are we beginning to hit the thresholds that we said we were going to aim for? And then you've reached a level of maturity. You'll then want to start looking at different investments beyond an acceptable level of maturity, such as things like the human factor or insider risk. Once you've reached a level of maturity, you'll need to start thinking about assurance of the controls that you've deployed. This is a great opportunity to bring in a red team to really test that your controls are effective and fit for purpose. That longer term objective of really making sure they are sustainable and enduring, a term that boards are very familiar with because regulators insist upon it, is crucial. So in conclusion, it's really important that whatever you've invested in sticks. Cyber risk should not be a silo risk. It should be part of the enterprise risk agenda. That way, it's leveled across all the other risks in your enterprise and gives you a calibration as to where your funding and investment needs to sit.